Meeting is starting.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you all for joining today. The Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety is holding this public workshop to discuss draft wildfire mitigation plan update requirements, or the WMP update guidelines. I am Nicole Dunlap, Program Manager of Energy Safety's Electrical Safety Policy Division. Joining me presenting today at this workshop are Dakota Smith and Tim Tutt. And just a reminder before we get going that this workshop is being recorded. So let's start off with the safety message. Just a few reminders, just be aware of your surroundings, make sure you know where your evacuation routes and your emergency exits are. This workshop is over 2 hours long, so please get up, stretch, step away from the computer if needed. If you are in need of help, please speak up by raising your hand or typing in the chat, and we will do our best to get you assistance. The agenda for today includes an overview of the purpose and background of WMP updates and update guidelines, followed by a review of WMP update required components, reportable update categories, and the evaluation process. We'll open it up for discussion following the presentation. During the discussion, we'll go over questions provided to Energy Safety ahead of the workshop, questions provided in the chat during the workshop so far, and we will unmute attendees to ask questions and contribute to the discussion verbally. Next slide, please. The purpose of today's workshop is to present and discuss the draft WMP update requirements chapter of the guidelines. Energy Safety, we will highlight the notable changes from the previously published update guidelines, and we welcome feedback and questions on the guidelines that may better inform public written comments, which are due by 5 p.m. Thursday, September 18th. Some quick background: Public Utilities Code Section 8386B provides that Energy Safety may allow annual WMP submissions to be updates to the last approved comprehensive, also known as a base wildfire mitigation plan. Currently, where we are in the WMP cycle in 2025, we are right now evaluating the Electrical Corporation's base wildfire mitigation plan covering the 2026 to 2028 WMP cycle. Next year in 2026, electrical corporations will submit updates to their 26 to 28 base plan. Those updates will focus on updates to their work in 2027 and 2028 as allowed. The goal of WMP updates is to enable each electrical corporation to provide new and updated information regarding its wildfire mitigation work in a focused and streamlined way. The WMP guidelines aim to allow us, Energy Safety, to efficiently evaluate significant updates and provide electrical corporations direction mid-WMP cycle. With that, I'll pass it over to Dakota, and he will talk about the WMP update requirements.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. I'll start with just like pointing out where the WMP update requirements chapter is placed in the overall WMP guidelines as a whole. Just a reminder that earlier this year in February, we adopted the updated WMP guidelines, which for the first time merged all of our previous separate guidelines documents into one, into the chapter format that you see on this slide. So just want to acknowledge that we published the draft, a chapter of the a WMP update requirements as a standalone chapter, but upon adoption, it will slide in and be chapter 6 in the previously adopted the guidelines, and it will be fit in, as you see on the screen, in chapter 6 with the previously adopted chapters before it, and the attachments and appendices after it. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So the required components of a WMP update. The first is the WMP update itself, which is a standalone document that contains the reportable updates organized by these 6 required categories, which we will talk about in future slides. A description of the downstream impacts of these reportable updates, and then new is an appendix which lists all the changes made to the redline based WMP that ties them to the associated reportable update that is mentioned in the WMP update. This is new this year because it allows a place for us and stakeholders to see the exact changes that were made to the base WMP and how it relates to the WMP update and vice versa. And as mentioned, the redline based WMP is also required. This must contain like new or a deleted text that is shown in tracked changes. The track changes can be done as a function in Word or done like manually through strikeout. A change in text of the color of the text. It's up to the EC how to do that, but we have included some instructions and examples in the guidelines as well. And just note on that a redline, a base plan is not needed if there are absolutely no reportable updates made in the WMP update. And the last note on the bottom, a clean base plan is not required upon the initial a submission of the update, but it will be required at the end of the process after energy safety issues its a decision. And then next up, we have reportable updates. What are reportable updates? We have a definition that they are specific changes focused on the update year in question that meet the requirements that are described in the update requirements chapter. Just to keep in mind that each a reportable update category has its own requirements of what is an allowed update and how it needs to be defined in that category. So keep that in mind as we walk through each of those sections in a bit. But for each reportable update, the electrical corporation must include the required information for each category, include any related impacts of the reportable updates in the other categories of the update, and any downstream impacts for the final year of a WMP cycle. So if we were looking at 2027, any downstream impacts as a result of an update for 27 that impact 28, which would be the final year of this cycle, would have to be reported as well. And then again, just a reminder that any reportable update must be also made in the redline based WMP. All right, and then so now an overview of these 6 required reportable update categories. The electrical corporation must provide its reportable updates in each of the following categories. 1 through 6, these are areas for continued improvement, risk models, new or discontinued programs, approved targets, projected expenditures, and lastly, administrative information. Note that if an electrical corporation has no reportable updates in any of these categories, it still must submit a WMP update that states no reportable updates for each of those categories, and confirm that the previously approved base WMP is still current. And we also have a definition on non-reportable updates. This These include changes that only affect the years prior to or after the update year, changes outside the required 6 reportable update categories that we went through on the previous slide, and changes within those categories that do not meet the specific requirements outlined in the update requirements chapter. As a note, that is different than last year. Energy safety will not evaluate non-reportable updates submitted in a WMP update. So that's some new language in this version of the guidelines. And with that, I'll pass it over to Tim to get us started on the reportable update categories.
Yeah, thanks, Dakota. Now we'll get into the specifics of what's required for each of these reportable update categories, and starting with the requirements for areas for continued improvement. For the areas of continued improvement, the requirements are that the Electrical Corporation were focused on updates in the update year, and we must report progress in those areas for continued improvement where energy safety has required reporting by or in the update year. Now, for each reportable area of continued improvement, the Electrical Corporation must report the code and title of the area of continued improvement, the description of the area of continued improvement, and a detailed description of the progress made compared to what is required. Now, as we know, these areas of continued improvement have codes and titles, and usually there's a description of what is required, and then what is asked for from the Electrical Corporation, what is required from them is a measure of how they've progressed compared to what is required in that area of continued improvement. And I'll just note that this section of the update submittal is limited to 20 pages in the guidelines. Next, we go on to risk models. And on risk models, I just want to make sure, note that there is no longer, as it was last time, a significant versus non-significant distinction for the risk model updates. That proved a little bit difficult to understand and evaluate last year. We've removed that. Right now, the Electrical Corporation must report updates to its risk models only when they are associated with or result in other reportable updates to areas of continued improvement, new and discontinued programs, or approved targets. Now, many areas of continued improvement require at least an examination of risk modeling, and so that is an area where an area of continued improvement might require a update in risk models. And the other updates in risk models that happen in the course of doing business might then change new or discontinued program information or approved target information, and we would want to have those reported as reportable updates in the document. Non-reportable updates, back one, please. Non-reportable updates for risk models include any changes not expected to be implemented by the update year, any changes that occur or expected to occur, for example, after 2027. We don't need to hear about those in this update, or any changes derived solely from already deployed mitigations, such as maybe a line that's been underlined in 2025 or 2026. These may change the targets and other information, but they do not constitute reportable risk modelable updates in our minds. Next slide. So for each reportable risk model update, the Electrical Corporation has to provide the information shown here, a detailed discussion of changes to methodology and models, the reasons for the updates, supporting analysis for those reasons, why we're doing this, the description of how risk scores and prioritization of risk have changed as a result of the updates, and a description with supporting analysis of the resulting changes to that risk prioritization, to the scheduling and work plans of mitigation initiatives or activities. Have any been enhanced or moved up in time or moved back in time, and those that are impacted by the risk model updates themselves. And then finally, a summary of changes to the top 20% riskiest circuits, including a description consistent with table 2.1, and the requirements and examples are in the next slides, and a description of risk model changes responsible for those circuit changes, what actually caused the changes in the circuits, and a discussion of the wildfire and outage and overall risk changes as appropriate. I mean, a particular risk model change may not change an outage risk, but if it does, we want to see why and have it explained to us in the update. And again, note that this section is limited to 20 pages. So this is a slide related to the reanalysis of the top 20% highest risk circuits. And you'll see table 2-1 template on the next page. But basically, we want you to provide, electrical corporations to provide a narrative discussion of the changes in the top 20% highest risk circuits, or indicate that there are no such changes, and show those resulting changes in a table with the template of table 2-1, including the risk ranking, circuit names, IDs, and links in miles, the updates in risk scores, and the overall outage, wildfire, and outage risk scores are included in the table. Previous scores, if they're updated, should be in parentheses, and then contribution to the top 20% of risk, that what percentage does this circuit involve in that top 20% amount, and updates to the risk drivers for those circuits, if there are any updates to that. Note that the electrical corporation must provide an Excel spreadsheet in any case with a full table of the top 20% risk circuits and reanalyzed. But in the actual document, the WMP update, you may limit table 2-1 to the top 20 lines if necessary. And here's table 2-1. And there's some example circuits shown here. You can see the risk ranking that may have changed, the circuit segment or span ID, length, etc., along the top. And then example 1 here is a circuit in which it was previously in the risk ranking prioritization, and it remains in the risk ranking prioritization, with no change in the risk scores. Example circuit 2, again, it was in the risk prioritization and it remains in the risk prioritization, but there has been a change in the risk scores. We want to see that change. Example 3 is a circuit in which it was not in the highest prioritization and the top 20% analysis previously, and now it is. And so we want to see that it's been included, and we want it to be shown in bold so we can tell that this is a new circuit, and that we want the percentage of overall utility risk included in the summation of 100% at the bottom of that second to last column. And then the fourth example is a circuit which previously was in the top 20% prioritization and has fallen out of that as a result of the risk model changes. So in that case, we would want to know that that had happened, and we would want to see this in the table in strikeout font, and it would no longer be added into the 100% at the bottom of the table. Next slide. Now we're moving on to new and discontinued programs.
I will take these, Tim.
Okay, thank you.
The requirements on reportable new or discontinued programs really haven't changed much since the last update guidelines. WMP updates must describe any new wildfire mitigation programs that the Electrical Corporation has created since its base plan submission, as well as any programs it has discontinued. Note that a discontinued program must be a premature or unplanned ending of a program, the completion of a program. For example, if all targets have been completed or a pilot program is concluding, these do not qualify as a discontinued program. In its WMP update, the Electrical Corporation must explain the creation or discontinuation of a program, including what lesson learned, policy change, regulation change, or otherwise prompted the change in programs. If the Electrical Corporation is implementing a new program or discontinuing a program that will not impact the update year, it must still explain the change in programs and why there is no impact to this particular update year. If an electrical corporation changes the name, purpose, or scope of an existing program, it must explain that change in this section as well. The creation or discontinuation of programs will likely have downstream impacts that the electrical corporation must explain and reflect in its redline WMP. For example, a new program might establish new targets, or a discontinued program might shift work to a different program. So while in your WMP update, the electrical corporation would explain, we have created or discontinued this program for these reasons, they must also reflect and point us to where in the redline WMP that new program is inserted. If it's a new veg management program, that program should be described in the redline WMP in the veg management section. So tell us about the new or discontinued programs in the WMP update, and then point us to where that's folded into your redline WMP itself. That's all we have on new and discontinued programs. So next we will talk about targets. There are some notable changes to what we see as a reportable target update. As with prior update guidelines, electrical corporations must submit target updates only in the following 4 mitigation categories: grid design, operations and management, vegetation management, situational awareness, and emergency preparation, community engagement, and collaboration. All reportable updates to targets as discussed on the following slides must be explained and justified due to a lesson learned, policy change, regulation change, or otherwise. Next slide, thank you. So qualitative targets, previously known as objectives, these updates are reportable when the electrical corporation has a status update for that qualitative target, then the status update is occurring in the update year or a future year of the WMP cycle. Quantitative targets, these are reportable when the electrical corporation anticipates a 15% or greater increase in that update year. Note that target decreases are allowed only certain circumstances, which we'll talk about now. So an electrical corporation must report quantitative target decreases only if it meets one of the following 4 criteria. If the electrical corporation overachieved a prior year's target, it may decrease the update year's target only if the 3-year cumulative target does not change and if it can prove that the same amount of risk reduction will be achieved. A target could also be decreased if the electrical corporation received a California Public Utilities Commission issued general rate case decision, or GRC decision, and the timing of that decision better lends itself to a WMP update rather than a base WMP petition to amend. So if the timing of when a decision is received is closer to when a utility is about to submit a WMP update, we consider a target decrease to be a reportable update relative to that GRC decision. A little bit more on this though. So for GRC related target decreases, the electrical corporation must meet all requirements outlined in the petition to amend chapter of the WMP guidelines. That is, in the WMP update that is submitted, that update must include all required components related to the GRC changes according to the petition to amend chapter. So if a utility is including a reportable update of a target decrease due to a GRC decision, you must reference the petition to amend chapter when you're preparing your WMP update to make sure you meet all the requirements of the petition to amend chapter, even though you're folding that into your WMP update. We can take questions at the end of this presentation if there's any unclarity around GRC decisions relative to WMP updates. But the last 2 circumstances where you might decrease a target, if it is a downstream impact from another reportable update, such as to the risk model or mitigation program. And last, a target can be decreased if it further reduces risk, such as if an electrical corporation expects fewer system outages. The last point on targets is that an electrical corporation cannot add or remove any 3-year targets unless it's a downstream impact from another reportable update. That's all we have on targets, so I'll pass it back over to Tim to finish out the rest of the required reportable update categories.
Yeah, and now we're moving to reportable expenditure updates, and we can move to the next slide. The reportable expenditure updates are significantly limited compared to previous update requirements. And so projected expenditures generally are not reportable on their own. They are only reportable if they occur as a result of another reportable update, like an approved target change or new and discontinued program. Those obviously might change expected or projected expenditures. And when that happens, we want that to be reported in the WMP update only at the mitigation category level, such as vegetation management, and not at the program or initiative level. We don't want to be going down to that level of detail in the WP update documents. And so the electrical corporation then may use table 2-2 to summarize the changes. This section is limited to 5 pages, and the next slide shows you an example of table 2-2. It just has, as you see, the mitigation category and what amount was approved in the base WMP, what the proposed update to that amount is for the category, and then a calculation of the difference so that we can see what has changed in terms of reportable projected expenditures for that category. Moving on to now administrative information. This is a new, I believe, update category for this year. And we're talking about reporting or requiring administrative information to be updated in a very limited fashion, only if the update is needed to evaluate the WMP update, to communicate with the electrical corporation as part of that evaluation or otherwise communicate, or to avoid undue confusion in how we do that evaluation. An example would be if a responsible person for a section changes, then we would want to know what that change is so that if we have a need to communicate about that section, we would be able to understand who to talk to. Same with phone number or contact information. We would need to be able to understand how to get into contact with the person that we need to talk to address that particular section of the WMP update. And a company reorganization might be a cause for that kind of change. Another example is a specific kind of typo that actually substantively changes the meaning of a sentence or a table or something, causing confusion in the evaluation process and for stakeholders. For example, if a particular statement includes the word not as a qualifier when that is not what is meant, when not shouldn't be there, that could be very confusing. And similarly, if a description says that a program or initiative is to be completed, when in actuality that activity has already been completed, that can also lead to questions that are unnecessary. Is this actually completed or isn't it? What's going on here? So this section is limited to 5 pages, and as I said, it's just limited to those kinds of changes. And I will now pass it back to Dakota.
Thanks, Tim. All right. So now we can talk about energy safety's evaluation process. This is a new section to the update guidelines or chapter. Just some information off the top that for WMP updates, pre-submissions, as we had with the past base plans, I will not be accepted. Of note, the evaluation of the WMP updates will follow the process and evaluation criteria set forth in Chapter 2, Section 4, so we will be evaluating the WMP updates through the same lens as the base WMP submissions. Also, non-reportable information may result in partial or full rejection of the WMP update a submission, and a denial of a WMP update may occur in whole or in part. If a WMP update submission is denied or rejected, Energy Safety may allow the electrical corporation to resubmit. Energy Safety may also direct the electrical corporation to retain previously approved base WMP portions for those areas of the update that were denied. And with that, we can move on to a discussion and question and answer portion. We did receive a number of pre-submitted questions in advance of the workshop, so we are going to start with those. And then after we answer these questions, we'll open it up to everyone here for hands raised and any other questions or comments that anyone might have. But I'll be taking these first few questions. The first one was on general instructions. Is there an expectation for electrical corporations to submit a clean document in addition to the redline version of the base WMP? And the answer is not at the time of initial submission of the WMP update or the redlined base WMP, but a clean version of the a base WMP will be required following Energy Safety's decision. The next question is on the required components of a WMP update. Is there an expectation for electrical corporations to update maps that may correspond to downstream impacts? Clarification regarding updating maps that are referenced in Appendix C, specifically maps tied to Figure 5-3 geospatial maps of the top risk areas within the high fire risk area. And the answer is yes, if the information on the maps changes as a result of a reportable update to risk models, including any downstream impacts, then the electrical corporation must update the maps on its publicly accessible geospatial website associated with the EC's WMP. Next slide. And then a question on non-reportable updates. Section 1.3 states that updates solely affect the year prior or after the update year are non-reportable items, whereas Section 2.3 states that new discontinued programs that do not affect the update year are reportable. For example, impacts preceding or following the update year. How are electrical corporations to approach the guidance in 1.3 and 2.3? We are going to look in the into the specific language from draft to final and clarify as needed. But the general principle is that reportable updates must impact the update year. There is an exception. There is an exception for new and discontinued programs, which may affect any year of the applicable WMP cycle, but must not be reported on years outside of the current cycle. And I think with that, then the next few questions are for Tim.
Yes, I'm going to take the next few questions, Dakota. Thank you. And there's a question on section 2.1, areas for continued improvement. And this is a question that says, regarding the 20-page limit, could this be revised to be either 1 page per ACI or a 20-page limit? And the answer to that question is, would you please include that question in your written comments and questions, and we will consider the result as we prepare the final document. Secondly, there's a question in section 2.2 on risk models. If risk model updates are reported in section 2.1 ACIs, do those risk model updates also needed to be reported in section 2.2 risk models? If so, how do they differ? The answer to that question is yes, the risk model updates should be reported in both places as applicable. If an ACI requires consideration of a risk model change for the update year, progress on that ACI must be documented in section 2.1. And any actual change in risk modeling as a result of that progress must be described in the risk model section 2.2, including the information required there, which is different than the typical ACI progress documentation. This is an example of perhaps a downstream impact of a reportable update. If you have a reportable update in area for continued improvement, you need to talk about that update as we required, but there's a downstream impact in that the risk models may have changed as a result of that area for continued improvement. And you need to talk about that downstream impact in the risk model section using the information that is required in that section. Next slide. And there's a question on section 2.2.1, the reanalysis of high-risk circuits. This section mentions table 3-1. There's no table 3-1. That is correct. This is a reference meant to be table 2-1. That question, yes, that is correct. The 3-1 was a typo that was inadvertently left in the document, and it will be corrected in the final to table 2-1. The next questions, I believe, are handled by me.
I'll take over from here. Tim, you froze a little bit, or is that on my end? Can you all hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yes.
The questions I'll be answering are a little bit on the longer side, so I'm not going to read them out, but they're there on the slide for you. This first question, the nature of is, if we're creating a new program, what is required for us to include in our WMP update relative to that program? And the person who asked this question is correct. It's spot on. If you are telling us that you're creating a new mitigation program, refer to the relevant section in the technical guidelines of the for the base WMPs, and include as much of the required information as you can on that new program. So the list here, yes, if you've created a new program, we want a tracking ID, we want relevant targets to that. The years 23 and 24 in that third sub-bullet don't really apply for the 26 to 28 plan, but generally try to include as much of the required information as the technical guidelines ask for in the WMP update for your new programs. If the new program is in its infancy and you can't provide all of the required components, just explain in the WMP update why you can't. We want to hear about all of the required components, even if you can't tell us, exactly what that data or information is. But the nature of this question is, yes, refer back to the technical guidelines and provide us as much information as you can relative to the new programs that you're implementing. And we spoke earlier that the new and discontinued programs is the one exception for the update years where we want to hear about any new or discontinued programs throughout the WMP cycle. So if by the time that you're submitting a 2027 update that you're going to be implementing a new program in 2028, then go ahead and tell us that in your 2027 update. What we don't want to hear about is a new program you're planning on implementing during the 2029 to 2031 cycle, and we don't want to hear about a program you discontinued in 2026 if you're submitting your 2027. So new and discontinued programs, if it relates to the WMP cycle, tell us about it. If it's prior to or after the current WMP cycle, we don't want to hear about it. All right, some questions on approved targets. One participant is asking that we consider adding enterprise systems as a category for reportable updates to targets. Please submit this as a written comment. We will take all written comments under advisement as we're considering what changes to make from the draft to the adopted guidelines. So please submit the enterprise systems recommendation as a written comment. In terms of a specific format for changing targets, again, use your WMP update to explain what you're changing, why you're changing it, and then use your red line WMP to say, this target is struck out. This is not our target anymore, even though it's what you approved. And then in new colored font, input what the new target is. So just reflect that target change in red line in your WMP and explain it to us in the WMP update document. And then reportable quantitative target decreases. Someone has asked for clarification on the petition to amend. We spoke on this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but just to reiterate, if an electrical corporation doesn't have a GRC decision in hand at the time of preparing your WMP update, then this allowance for decreasing a target due to a GRC decision simply doesn't apply. If a utility does have a GRC final decision in hand, the utility has two options. They can either submit a petition to amend its entire base plan. So say we just approved a base plan and a month later you get a GRC decision. The timing of that decision best lends itself to file a petition to amend the most recently approved WMP. If it's a whole calendar year later and you're getting ready to submit your update WMP and that's when you get your GRC decision, then the timing of that better lends itself to including those changes in your WMP update. Again, still following the petition to amend chapter requirements. So again, if you have a GRC decision in hand, that's the only way that you are allowed to use that allowance to decrease a target. You can either do so in your WMP update requesting to decrease that target, stating why due to the GRC decision, or you can go through the full petition to amend process to amend the full base plan that was recently approved. These two questions are a bit long. The nature of them are asking about the regulatory allowances when a target can be changed. I want to call attention to two things. The person asking this question referred to section 2.4 and 2.4.3. These are about two different types of target changes. Section 2.4 is about a target increase. And that's with this other rationale or other regulations beyond just a GRC decision. There could be any number of reasons that a utility can increase their target. Internal policy change, regulation change, we want to know why you're increasing that target, but there's a lot less limitations on when we want to hear about a target increase. When we're talking about target decreases, section 243, that's where there's more limited opportunities for you to tell us about a target decrease. The only regulation relating to a target decrease that we are allowing is if you have a GRC decision. So I just want to make sure the person who asked this question understands that, there could be a full range of reasons, regulatory or not, that you are asking to increase a target. If you're asking to decrease a target, the only regulation that would be applicable is if you have a GRC decision. I think that gets to the nature of these two questions, but if the person who asked this is on the line during the open Q&A after we get through these pre-submitted questions, you can clarify or ask something additional on these questions. And then Tim will finish off with our last few pre-submitted questions.
Computer completely froze, and so I have had to reboot and ran into the updates occurring situation. So I need a little bit of time to get to where I need to be. Appreciate it.
I can take these, Tim.
Okay.
As you get back up. All right. We had a question on the projected expenditures. If future regulatory developments result in changes to the budget or projected budget that impact the general rate case or GRC? Is there an established mechanism within the current framework to accommodate such changes and adjust targets accordingly? Energy safety is following regulatory developments closely, and if any future changes are made, then we will be looking into those. Then our last question is on administrative information. If we have an incorrect figure in a table, can we update the figures in the table? What is the mechanism to make a simple update in a table without a type of rejection occurring? Answer for this, updating a figure in a table or any aspect of a table is reportable in this section only if it substantially changes the meaning of the table or the information within the table. If the change to the table is not reportable, then it should not be included in the update a submission. And this could be an example of something that is more applicable for a change in the next base plan a submission if it does impact that next a WMP cycle. But okay, that was all of the pre-submitted questions that we had. So I think we can open it up to the open Q&A if anyone has any additional questions, or if you asked a written question earlier and want more clarification or have a follow-up question, now is the time for that. You can use the raise hand button in Teams, or if you're on the phone, I believe that you can press #5 to raise and lower your hand. You can use the chat feature to submit a written question.
Dakota, looks like we have a few questions in chat or in the Q&A, and I'll take us through those, but the rest of the attendees should feel welcome to continue putting written questions in the Q&A or raising your hand. Keep it raised and we'll get to you when we can. The first question from Lena, section 1.3 says that updates to years prior or after, i.e. 2028, are not reportable, but this section seems to contradict that. Clarifying here is, generally, we only want to hear about the update year. So that would be the 2027 update coming next year. If you have a new or discontinued program that is expected to impact 2028, you can tell us about that. If you have a downstream impact of another reportable update that impacts, say, targets in 2028, then we do want to hear about that too. Try to focus your reportable updates on only the update year. If downstream impacts trickle into the following last year of the cycle, go ahead and tell us about that. If you've started a new program or discontinued a program that impacts the current WMP cycle, we want to hear about that as well. If you're trying to tell us something that you are doing or changing in 2025 or 2026 or 2029, those are the things that are non-reportable. All right, from Charles, how are missed WMP initiative targets treated in subsequent years? The draft update requirements do not clearly state whether uncompleted work can be credited later as a catch-up or rollover. For example, if a utility falls 20 miles short of a 2024, I'm assuming that might be like a 2026 undergrounding target due to external constraints, but completes the additional 20 miles, say in 2027 or 8, shouldn't those 20 miles be recorded as a 24 deficiency rather than counted towards 25 progress? Getting a little bit confused with the years because we're talking about the 26 to 28 plan, but the gist of this is, can we decrease a target in the update year and plan to catch up and make those targets up in the subsequent years? The answer to that is no. We're only allowing a target decreased if you overachieved in a prior year. We are not allowing a target decrease with a promise that you'll make that up in the following year. And then the last question I see so far is from Lena. Regarding target decreases, the guidelines state that an allowable decrease can result from doing more work the year prior. Depending on the timing of the WMP update submission, utilities may not know whether they will complete more or less work in the year prior. What is the mechanism to then change a target once the year prior progress is known? I think I answered that with the last response, but generally, like by the time you submit your 2027 update, you should have an idea of what you have achieved in 2026 to know if you have overachieved in 2026 so that you can ask to reduce your 2027 target. And I invite Lena or Charles, if I didn't properly answer any of those questions, or if you have clarifying points, let me know. I see Lena has her hand up. Let's call on her before we get to Jay's question.
Lena, I allowed your mic. You just need to unmute.
Thank you, Nicole. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so regarding my last question, I think we're assuming that the timing of the 2027 WMP update would be filed in sometime in the earlier part of 2026, in which case we wouldn't know necessarily the progress of the work performed in 2026. So my question kind of relates to that timing and whether there would be a mechanism later in 2026 or 2027 to reflect target changes based on 2026 work.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think it's any year prior. So say you learn by your 2028 update that you overachieve in 2026, then you could ask to reduce your 2028 target so long as your 3-year cumulative does not change. But understand the timing. Yes, the 2027 updates would be submitted earlier in the year in 2026, so utilities might not have a good gauge of what their actuals will be by the end of 2026.
Okay, so just considering if we overachieve in 2026 and there's no mechanism to change a 2027 target, to decrease a 2027 target to reflect that, is the expectation that electrical corporations speak to that in their annual report on compliance?
See another hand up. Let me get to Jay's question in Q&A. Understanding that timelines may be subject to change, is there a general time frame Energy Safety anticipates for the submission deadline of when the initial schedule will be provided? Typically, we ask for WMP submissions around springtime, so that's what we're going to aim for again for next year. But we hope to get the initial schedule published ideally by the end of this calendar year. But to your point, Jay, everything is subject to change. And then I see Holly has her hand up.
Holly, I allowed your mic. You just need to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I've been having audio problems. I wanted to follow up on Charles's comment. I think the concern Charles was raising was, let's say, for example, a utility has undergrounding targets of 100 miles in 2026 and 100 miles in 2027, and they complete 80 miles in 2026, and they fall short by 20 miles. If they complete those miles that they fell short in the next year, does that count towards that 100 miles of 2027, or would it be more appropriate for them to complete 120 miles in 2027 in order to say that they've actually caught up?
The catch-up is related to the 3-year cumulative total. What we are not allowing is a promise of overachieving in a future year. We want to see that the utility has already overachieved that target, and that's why they're asking to decrease a later year's target. We will not accept a target decrease if the utility says, hey, we fell short this much this year, we'll make it up next year. We want to see that that overachievement has already been done by the time the update is submitted to us.
So just to clarify, are you looking at compliance over the whole 3-year period of saying by the end of this 3-year period, you need to complete all your commitments, but if they don't happen necessarily in the planned year, then I guess what happens then?
So policy, when we're doing the WMP evaluations, is looking at the 3-year cumulative target. And like I said, if it was overachieved, then you can ask to reduce a particular year's target, so long as the 3-year cumulative target doesn't change. When it comes to the annual report on compliance, if a utility underachieved 1 year, then they need to take it up with compliance to say we underachieved 20 miles this year, but we plan on making it up next year. But in terms of what's in the WMP and what we will approve or not approve to be reflected and changed in the WMP, it's only if overachievement has already been accomplished, not a promise to overachieve in a future year.
Okay, thank you.
Question from Lena. Can you please clarify reportable updates on qualitative targets? So qualitative targets, previously known as objectives, if the utility has a status update for that qualitative target, you can report the progress of that status change in the update year. So qualitative are not as countable as quantitative. So it's not that it's an increase or decrease of a percentage. It's if you have a progress, a status update, something you want to tell us that you have achieved or not achieved relative to that qualitative target, that would count as a reportable update. We'll leave the space open for a few more minutes in case there's any other hands raised or written questions. All right, hearing nothing further, Dakota, I will let you close us out with some remarks on how folks can submit their written comments.
Just another question in the.
Do we need to submit the WMP annual template with our WMP update? Jay, I'm not sure what you mean by the template. Maybe you could come off mute and explain a little more.
Okay, Jay, I allowed your mic. You just need to unmute.
Use it again. Okay.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'm referencing the Excel file that we had to submit as part of our 26 to 28 WMP. There was an Excel file we had to submit as well in the data guidelines. So I'm just curious if those go hand in hand, if we'll be having to refile that annual template in addition to our WMP update at the same time.
Let me get back to you, Jay. My expectation, I'll need to circle back with our data analytics division. My expectation is that yes. I mean, we're essentially asking for a red line WMP and all of its components and attachments submitted to us, with any red line associated with a reportable update reflected throughout that submission. Let me just check with our data analytics team to see what their expectations are for that particular Excel file. So we'll take that back.
Thank you.
So another question by Lena in the Q&A.
Do all tables in the WMP update need to also be submitted in a single master Excel file similar to the base WMP tables? Again, I think that's similar to Jay's question. I expect the answer to be yes, but let me circle back with our data team and we'll get back to you.
And then as a reminder that the reanalyzed circuit table, if it's over 20 rows, has to be submitted as an Excel file either way.
Yeah, that table has to be submitted as an Excel file, whether it is over or under 20 lines. We just want the Excel file.
Any other questions? Okay, well, there's still an opportunity. They're still within the comment period, and Dakota will close us out today with a few notes on how to submit us written comments on the guidelines.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We just got another question from Lena.
Thank you. Thanks, Lena.
No, not a problem.
Regarding risk ranked circuits, is the expectation to follow table 6-4 risk ranking or 5-5 risk ranking? I'm not sure if we have anyone on from energy safety who can clarify this. This might be something else we have to get back to you on when we look at both tables. So we'll get back to you on that, Lena.
All right, not seeing any other questions. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone. We can move on to some next steps and closeout. As mentioned, we are in the middle of the open public comment period. This is open until September 18th, so still a couple weeks. I think it's 2 weeks from today. So all of the written comments are due by 5 p.m. on the 18th of this month, and must be filed in the WMP guidelines docket. We have that linked here for everyone. Just a few reminders on that my comments must pertain only to the draft WMP update requirements chapter that we talked about at this workshop, and that written comments must not exceed 15 pages. Supporting documents may be included as appendices or attachments and are not included in that 15-page limit. And I believe that is all that we had. So appreciate all of the participation and the questions I submitted early and all the questions that were asked at the workshop. And we we're looking forward to seeing everyone's comments. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks all.